um, FAST members, and what was the international? Oh my gosh, help me here. The Girls' Day, Aviation Girls' Day. What is the official name now? I can't remember. Anyway, yes, we're very involved. What is it? I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. That was so easy. Like it should just roll off the tongue, but it doesn't. So yes, so we love female members. Obviously, we do have some. What are they? 39 and a half or 36? 45 and a half, whatever they're. Some spouses join our group as well. So we welcome everybody. The other thing I wanted to mention was I'm also a second lieutenant with the Civil Air Patrol. We do have some Civil Air Patrol members here, Roger and Trevor. They're with the Spokane Phelps Field Squadron. I'm with the Deer Park Squadron. We are doing fundraising for Wreaths Across America, if you know what that is, which is where we lay wreaths at the veteran graves around, mainly at the Spokane Veteran Cemetery, and then also we're laying wreaths at Deer Park Cemetery for the veterans that are buried there. So if you'd like to contribute a wreath, they're $15 to do that, or you can just give a donation. That's fine too. We'll take all the donations and add them up to be the cost of a wreath, which is $15, and then of course we'll put a wreath down in your honor. So, or in the honor of the person who you'd like. So whether it's a family member or a spouse or somebody you knew that you served with. So. Anyway, that's all I have. Thanks for having us here, and we're excited to be here and share Darcy's with you guys, and we love collaborating.
Thank you, Kat. Okay, did I miss any other announcements? Oh, one other shout out. I think we've got Rachel who's here for the first time tonight. Rachel, I just wanted to say hi and welcome. Is there anyone else? Yeah. Awkward clap. Is there anyone else who this is your first WPA meeting that you're joining us for? Josh, our presenter. Okay, well that's a great segue into what's next here. So welcome Josh and Rachel. So I'm going to kind of be in front of the camera because we're now live streaming live on YouTube. So again, if you can't make it to a meeting in the future, you can do so in the future and get wings credit for it. So I'm going to introduce our panel tonight, and I'm excited and very grateful that they've agreed to present tonight. We've got Trevor, we've got Josh, and we've got Tom. And two of these guys share the same last name, so we might hear a little bit about that. But I'd like for them to each introduce themselves, and then we're going to do our panel discussion tonight. So thank you, presenters, for being here tonight, and enjoy the program.
Okay, well, thank you. My name is Tom Morris, and most of you probably know me as well. Up the working? Okay. And anyway, tonight what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of an informal, non-rehearsed flight instructor panel on flight reviews. And we will all give kind of a little take on it, and we'll work off of each other, and we'll work towards also talking about the WINGS program and how it works into the flight review program. So each one of us will kind of tell a little bit about our story, how we got here, and what we're looking for, through the flight review and how to keep everybody safe. We're finding out in today's flying, things have changed. It's not the same as it was 30, 40 years ago when I learned to fly. There's a lot new stuff out there that we all now have to know how to use and abide by the rules and regulations of the airspaces. So with that, I started flying right out of high school, going into college. Started in Pullman, went to Yakima, taught for a while, and ended up back at Phelps Field where I was a pilot examiner for a while for the FAA. Got hired by the airlines, found out that I couldn't do pilot examining time-wise and fly for the airlines at the same time, so I gave that up and went full-time, and now I'm a retired airlines. I started with Cascade Airways, for those of you who knew who they were. Went on to Republic Airlines, and then that was bought by Northwest Airlines, and then graduated as a Delta pilot when I retired. So aircraft-wise, I did fly 747s for a while. I retired off the Airbus 330 out of Seattle as my base. So I had a good career, fortunate, and enjoyed every bit of it. But now I'm ready to be home and stay around here a little bit. So we're going to get this started. I think Trevor's going to start tonight. He'll tell a little bit about himself and then go into his part of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. I guess just let me know if this cuts out. I think I can hear it here, but my name is Trevor Steen, and I started flying, it was about 12 years ago, in Montana. I'm from Montana. I just recently moved over to Spokane about 2 years ago for my job with Horizon Air. And so I started flying in Hamilton, Montana. I got my private, did my instrument in commercial and CFI all over in Missoula and Stevensville area, and have flown all over Montana for about 2,500 hours, about 1,500 hours of instruction over in Missoula with North Star Jet, which is part of Neptune Aviation. And 3 years ago, I started my airline career with Horizon Air in the Dash 8, based here in Spokane. And just this last winter, I upgraded to captain. So currently in the left seat of the Q400 here in Spokane with Horizon Air. And also my free time, I'm with the Civil Air Patrol, as Kat mentioned. That's probably been, oh boy, 5 years or so. I'm an instructor pilot, a check pilot examiner with Civil Air Patrol as well. Also an aircraft owner. I have a Cessna 152 here at Phelps, so I've gotten to experience the whole general aviation role, and I really enjoy it. And then also my kind of side work is TBMs, SCADA TBMs. I'm an instructor pilot for an outfit that does initial and recurrent training in the TBM. So I just have my hands in everything, and my wife says, "Why aren't you ever home?" So here I am tonight. But anyways, so tonight we want to talk about flight reviews. We're not going to get super in depth with what exactly happens in it, but I'd like to just give you an overview, and then kind of tie in the wings program, and kind of some of the, Josh will talk a little bit about expectations during a flight review. But I'd like to start off just with the kind of what the flight review is, what resources are out there to help you prepare for it. As an instructor, I really utilize the FAA website quite a bit. So they have a really good advisory circular out there that covers pretty much everything you need to know on the flight review. So that is the 6198 Delta is the current edition of that. So always sent my flight review applicants or students to look at that before we met and just kind of discuss what some of those expectations are. Kind of let Josh talk a little bit more of that. But that advisory circular lays out quite a few things, quite a few resources. And for those of you who haven't really looked at an advisory circular in a long time, don't know where to find them, you can always just kind of use I hate to say Google all the time, but Google it, or just go to faa.gov, and you can it's pretty intuitive, just work through their site there. They've got a lot of good resources. Just cutting out a little bit, so I'll do my best here. Anyways, some of the first things in that advisory circular are going to be some resources and discussions on what the purpose of the flight review is. So we get those every 5 years, right? Crickets. Only if we forget, right? Yeah, so most of us know the flight review as the biannual flight review. More recently is referred to as just the flight review, in an effort to encourage people to seek training more than just every 2 years, or as appropriate. Somebody that flies, every day probably doesn't need as much training as somebody who flies 2 or 3 times a year and just wants to knock the rust off. So it's now called the flight review. Some of the things that I talk about during a flight review are proficiency plans, ways to keep yourself proficient. When was the last time you went out and did a stall on purpose anyway? So, or slow flight, steep turns, all those things that were so much fun when we got our certificates. The idea in the flight review is that we can still perform to that level. One of the changes also, practical test standards, probably what everybody's familiar with. The FAA went through those a couple years ago, and it's now the Airman Certification Standards. So reviewing those before showing up for a flight review is good, because it tells you exactly when we go do a steep turn, how many degrees of heading, that we want you to be within, and altitude, things like that. So, and just to kind of clarify, it's not a check ride, but it is, you can't fail a flight review. So a lot of times people show up and Josh will probably test this, but they're really nervous, think it's a check ride. It's just a review. We want to see, areas that you want to improve in, areas maybe you didn't realize you needed to improve in, and then come up with a way to just kind of sharpen you up. So ultimately you come out the other side a safer pilot, and that's what we're looking for. Some of the resources that are kind of new, the IACRA is the 8710 form you filled out with all your hours and stuff to take a private or instrument check ride. You can now use the online, which is IACRA, I can't remember what it stands for off the top of my head, the Integrated Airman Certification and Rating Application. So, this is just an effort to kind of take a screenshot of your experience and your hours. So you could fill that out at the end of a flight review or before you show up and submit it with your instructor. And I know with a lot of these wildfires and hurricanes, I've seen a few folks who've lost logbooks due to those things, and they have no record of their training, or they really have to work really hard to find that. So the flight review is an opportunity for you to kind of take a screenshot of your experience and submit that online through the IACRA. So I typically recommend people do that, and so that's pretty painless. The the ACS Airman Certification Standards, you can also find those on the FAA website. Those really lay out, they've done a nice job of kind of transitioning from the practical test standards, and the Airman Certification Standards it's plain English. It says, before you do your maneuvers, you do clearing turns, you're aware of emergency landing locations, things like that. They just really kind of help you get a good idea of what each maneuver, what kind of decision-making process is there, what kind of piloting skill is there, and so definitely want to review those. Let's see, I talked about this advisory circular, and if you look this 6198 Delta advisory circular up, it has all the stuff that I mentioned, so it's a really good resource. The instrument proficiency check for those who are instrument rated, it's also in that same advisory circular. So if you're looking at getting a refresher for instruments, or just it's been a while and you need an IPC, that's a good place to start. In the back of this AC, there are, and I'll hold this up as if you can see it, I know you can't, but there are checklists here with all of kind of these things that I mentioned on it. On the back, there's a whole bunch of areas to review before you show up on the FARs. I know that I read the FARs every morning for a couple hours before I go to work, so it's not a problem for me. But and if anyone does that, I would seek some counseling, because it's not healthy. But this is broken down into a real nice checklist of things to kind of refresh on before you show up. And this is what, when I do flight reviews, we just go down the list, and I just look for areas that I'm not really sure on the airspace. Okay, let's talk about airspace. It's pretty easy to talk about dropping objects. Not many people do that unless you go up to Cutbank, Montana. They throw bowling balls out and try and hit cars once a year. I don't know if I'm supposed to publicize that, but it's a good time. So the checklist there in the back of that advisory circular, there's also some kind of, and you can make your own things, but these are kind of nice because the FAA has gone ahead and made some sample proficiency plans. That's not what this one is, but you can print it off and it says, hey, every 4 to 6 weeks, go out and practice these maneuvers, and here's some things to practice. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for, is that when you come to a flight review, is you've done some slow flight, you've done some steep turns, you've looked at a sectional and planned a cross-country flight, and you're familiar enough that you can decide which airspace is what and safely navigate around it or through it. So, and Josh gives flight reviews quite a bit, so he's going to talk a little bit about that. I think that I don't want to go into too much about what happens during the flight review, but Tom's going to talk about the wings program and how that relates to this, because effectively you can almost do the wings and you don't even have to show up and meet with an instructor for an official flight review, but he'll elaborate on that. Trying to think here. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Just that advisory circular, really great resource. I have, if you want to come up afterwards, I have some of these checklists. I only have about 10, but if somebody just would rather grab one here and take one home to look at, you're more than welcome to come up here, and or I can send you an email with it if you'd like to. So, but that's all I have. We're going to take questions at the end of this, so if you have questions specifically for me or something, you can shout them out when we get there. But I'm going to turn it over to Josh, and he can introduce himself. I kind of have to hold this thing so it's a little loose.
Is it shorting? Is that what's
No,
wrong?
it's just not good connection, so I just kind of holding it in.
Probably now. You guys hear me?
Let me shut it off first. Let's do a switcheroo.
You don't want a big squeal.
No, it's on it.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Is it this gonna be the same problem with a different mic? You're hot again.
Check, check, check. All right. Loud and clear. My name is Josh Morris. I started flying 4.5 years ago. And I started in Yakima, Washington. And from there, I decided I want to make this a career. So I ended up joining ATP Flight School. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Started off at the Sacramento location and decided I want to get a little closer to the Northwest. So I transferred to the Portland location. So I did my private training in Sacramento. I did my instrument training in Portland, check ride in North Carolina. Did my private multi-training in Portland, my check ride in Camarillo, California, or by LA. Then I did my multi-commercial training in Portland, and the check ride was in Portland, finally. And then I did my MEI was my CFI initial in North Las Vegas, and my CFI, my double I, and my comm single overall within about 7 days of each other over in Dallas, Texas. So they had us pretty busy for that year. From there, I started flight instruction over in Yakima, and then was offered a position with Hillsborough Aero Academy in Portland, and I jumped at that because I love the area over there. I was then offered a position as a lead flight instructor and a chief pilot back in Yakima, where I started my training to begin with, so I took that job. And then my fiance loves Spokane, so we decided to move here, and now I'm flight instructing at Northwest Flight Service. So kind of been all over the place, and I think I'm going to stick around with this one. We were asked to come and give a presentation on bionic flight reviews, and I jumped at the opportunity to represent Northwest Flight Service. They've been awesome to me, and to be new and moving over and helping me out to transition into the 172s over here, the new airspace. Having the Charlie shelf right next to a little Delta helps out with the students and all the airspace knowledge. And it really helps for biennial flight reviews because not a lot of people are very familiar with different airspaces, especially if you're non-towered and now you're hanging around a Charlie airspace right into a Delta and that kind of thing. So with that said, I also, on the side, I fly a Citation SIC, and that's here and there, but it's been a good experience, and the end goal hopefully would be to go to the airlines, but we all know how that's working out with COVID, so at some point. And I'm sitting next to my uncle, which is awesome, so I get to kind of learn from somebody that's been there, done that. So hopefully one day down the road I'll be able to sit in the chair and have somebody next to me that's related to me as well, having the same conversation. So what I wanted to talk about today is, as a flight instructor who currently gives biennial flight reviews and fairly regularly, I want to talk about some of the things that I would like to see. I'm sure other instructors would like to see as well. Maybe some of the things that are expectations of people that are coming in for a review that aren't really something that we look for or are realistic. And that would be, the FAA recommends 1 hour ground and a 1 hour flight, correct? That's every 2 years. Well, the problem with that is the FAA minimum. We don't want to ever seek for minimums, especially when we're looking at aviation. Our whole job as pilots is to mitigate risk, and that even comes with when we're flying, we need to make sure that we are always proficient and not just current. So with that said, we have, the FAA gives us a guideline of, in the advisory circular was talked about with Trevor, the 6198, they recommend setting up a plan with an instructor that's every 4 to 6 weeks. So if they're recommending something like that, then it probably really isn't that realistic to come in every 2 years and expect to do 1 hour ground, 1 hour flight, and then walk away and just go fly happy and dandy. So what we're looking for is for people to be extremely safe in all aspects of aviation. That includes the ground portion, which we all know is super fun to sit there and read books and learn all the new stuff. But if you don't have the information, then when you hop in an aircraft and take off, now everything's a lot faster. And if you don't have it already down on the ground, it's going to be a lot more difficult while you're moving across the ground, right? So with changes in aviation, there's changes throughout the years. One specific is the ADS-B. So if you're not constantly staying up with the new times and the new changes with aviation, it can be difficult. And that's where we're seeing a lot of gray area with people coming in for BFRs or flight reviews. The reason why is because things have changed and they haven't kept their aviation knowledge growing, and that can be a little bit of an issue when we're looking at signing people off for the biannual or the flight review. So with that said, I really recommend using programs, current programs. The WINGS program is a great one, obviously, to keep people current, keep people proficient, and with that said, that keeps everybody safe. Like Trevor talked about, we do have a checklist that's recommended by the FAA, and we do use that. What I like to do with my flight reviews is I have like a phone call, especially during the COVID times. We want to talk first remotely, and what we talk about is what type of flying do you do? How frequently do you fly? What kind of certificates do you have? What's your background? A little bit about you in general, and that way we can cater a flight review to your style of flying. Not everybody does the same stuff. You know, I'm sitting here with my style of flying, and Trevor's sitting here with his. Tom also. Everybody in this room has their own type of flying, and so that's what we're trying to do. Is if that's what your goal of aviation is, then we need to cater the flight review to make sure that that style of flying is safe. With that said, we then come up with a game plan, whether that be a cross-country flight plan, and then you'll bring those in. Gives us at least an hour to talk about, airspace, sectional usage, regulations, rules, VFR weather minimums, all that good stuff. And once we've established that you have a good foundation, then we move into the aircraft, and at that point, whatever the game plan is for the day, we'll go ahead and conduct that. And Trevor mentioned earlier, it's not a check ride. You're right, it's not a check ride at all. However, it's okay to not get signed off on that one flight. It's okay. You didn't fail something. It's not going to go on your record. It's at that point, it's a growing experience, and it's time to sit back and go, okay, I do need to learn more. I do need to accept that this wasn't where it should have been, and that's good because it keeps everybody safe. Once you get to the point where the signature has been put in your logbook and you're good for another 2 years, that's not where it stops. You still need to come in, fly regularly, stay proficient, use programs, and use CFIs. Almost every airport has some sort of flight program, has CFIs walking around. We have nothing else to do other than hang out at airports, right? So with that said, come knock on the door, say hi to us in Northwest. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions, no matter what questions you guys have. And if you want to come up and do some recurrent training, we'd be more than happy to take you guys up and do whatever you guys need to do to get current and stay safe. With that said, I had mentioned recurrent training, so we're going to talk about WINGS program, and I'll have Tom do that.
All right, thanks, Josh. We're fortunate tonight. We have Mr. Tickner here, Robert Tickner in the back, who's going to correct any mistakes that I make along the way here, talking about the WINGS program. So, to start off, things have changed so much. It's hard to stay ahead of the technology, the knowledge that's coming out in all the equipment. So the WINGS program basically has been set up to help do that. So we're going to start off. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the advantages. First of all, if you're involved in the WINGS program and you do have a little bit of a mishap, The WINGS program will actually help you from the side the FAA is looking at you, seeing that you're trying to stay current and looking at some of the training experience you've had. And it may change a little bit the way they administer whatever they need to do to get you proficient or back in the air safely. So a strong WINGS record is always good. Using this type of training environment to get everything caught up and ready to go. The WINGS program was developed in 1996. It was set up basically to help those recurring mistakes go away. And early on, the program was a little hard, I felt, to get through the computer programming to get set up and use the program itself. Since then, it's been upgraded quite a bit. And I use, I think the biggest upgrade in it is the Quick WINGS tab in the WINGS program. You can go there and everything is set up from your profile to your checklist to what you need to know to get through that check ride that may be coming up here pretty soon. In the WINGS program, people who have taken that has pretty much found out that they're safer pilots. I've read, and it was in an article, and I kind of set me back a little bit, that people who are involved in the WINGS program have less than 1% of the accidents or mishaps that occur. Now that's pretty bold statement, you know, for a specific program like that. The program itself is based on 3 ground lessons that you would take on the computer. You can select different lessons. They have them available as 3 different topics. And you'll go through and complete those topics, take a small test, and once you get the 3 ground subjects done, you can go ahead and there are 3 flight activities then that are required. Those flight activities can actually be done in one flight. It will take more than just an hour to do that, but it's not necessarily 3 different flights. You can do all 3 flight activities in one flight. And once those things are completed, then the FAA will sign off your flight review for you. So to get started, you go to the WINGS, and we were talking about Google earlier. You can Google FAA WINGS safety program. It will come up. You can follow the prompts to go through and sign up. One of the big items is when it comes down and says user or airman, you want to specify airman because that will give you the right criteria for training as you go through the program. And what I did is I brought a couple of sheets, which you're not going to be able to see, but this is the Quick WINGS base page. And what it has on it at the top are the ground lessons that it suggests that you go through. It shows if you've enrolled or completed those. And then it also has on the bottom portion of this, the flight requirements of the flight activities. And then once those are completed, they all have to be done within a 12-month segment. You can do one this month, one next month, and the order of events really doesn't matter as long as they're all done within the 12-month segment. And down at the bottom, there's a little tape that runs along that shows you when you're going to run out of that 12 months on whatever program that was. So your profile can be set up on this page. You can change your profile, but the Quick WINGS tab and then My WINGS is where you want to go to get everything started once you get signed up. And once you do that, you can print out, uh-oh. Are we there? Okay. This is a checklist. This happens to be my checklist. It shows that I've got 1 ground item completed. I've got 2 more to go. And then on the next page, it shows that I've got 3 flight items yet to complete. Now my flight review is good until September of 21. And that is also indicated on this page so that you can kind of keep track of what you're looking at from the Quick WINGS page. Oh boy, as a flight instructor, you can use the activities that you've presented flights. When I go out and fly with somebody, if a flight instructor flies with 5 different people and does 15 different events or 15 different activities over a 24-month period of time, you can take that flight record into the FAA and actually get your flight instructor renewed. And that's really kind of nice to stay involved. That way I'm looking at these programs all the time. I'm looking at the new criteria, the new material that's coming out to study. And I don't know, I just feel like I'm more in the loop, as does the student. You can sit home and learn this stuff on your own. These programs are about 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes with a quick little test at the end. If there's, and they've got a list of different programs that you can go through. And so you're not confined to one certain area. You can pretty much go through and find something that you're interested in. So with that, I'm pretty much completed. Robert, is there anything that we should bring up that's beyond that? Okay. All right. So are there questions from anybody that? Sure.
So I'm pretty familiar with the wings program, and I think some of those are pretty dynamite. But you alluded to new regulations and the procedures. Is there specifically a wings unit just based on that?
Robert?
What's changed?
Regulatory new changes,
Yeah.
they're working on some programs like that, but
Yeah, where you could go and see, what's happened in the last year, what should I be aware of?
right, and we do.
Repeat the question and the answer.
That's something that we do have to break the courses.
Okay, the question there was, is there a spot that we can go find the new regulations and new things that we need to find? And Robert, I didn't quite hear the answer to that. Was that?
I'll look up and see if there's a course.
Okay, we're gonna look it up. All right.
Epic aircraft, they have the different changes and guides for flying.
Okay, I'm just seeing from one of our fabulous instructors here, a summary of the FAR guidance changes for GA pilots from Epic Aircraft. That's obviously not an FAA publication, but it's one that somebody's keeping track of. Okay, any more questions? Dan?
Yeah, it's just about the BFR. Two questions. I know about 2 or 3 years ago, the FAA was wanting everyone to fill out an online application for the BFR. I think they kind of pulled back from that a little bit, so it was now just an endorsement in the logbook sufficient. And then in COVID, the second question was in COVID times. I think it's a little bit hard to follow the special FARs. Does everyone get a 2-month reprieve, or how's that work in terms of?
Okay, I'm gonna let Trevor answer that first question, then have you restate the second one. Trevor?
Sure. So the question was that there were a really big push on using IACRA for a flight review, which is the online airman certification stuff. They got really excited about it, but they didn't have the functionality on the website. So you could get everything in there, but you couldn't select flight review. So you couldn't submit it. That is now in there. I think as of a year or so ago, you can actually go in there. And I did actually go try it the other day. Sure enough, you can click flight review. And then it goes just the same as any other application, but there's no... It's not mandatory. Nope. It's just a suggestion for some of the reasons I mentioned, as far as kind of like a snapshot of your flying experience. Another thing that they're trying to do with that is they know how many pilots have certificates. They don't know how many people are actually still really flying. So this is an opportunity for the FAA to kind of see, hey, we've got these people that are regularly flying. And so out of all of the certificate holders, 60% are still actually active, and the rest are maybe not, because as you know, your pilot certificate never expires. And I don't know what happens after we pass away, if they're still in the system or what. But anyways, another day for that. And I don't have an answer for you on the special FAR or the COVID stuff. I haven't looked at that. You guys?
I have no idea.
Yeah. I know they're a little tricky, and then they extended it and did some stuff, but it only applied to people in certain circumstances. So I definitely read it real close and maybe find somebody that's familiar with it. Hopefully it'll be done soon. So as Josh mentioned, they're flying quite a bit now, so hopefully you can go get your flight review done if you need to, and not have to worry about it. So. Any more questions? Roger.
Maybe for Tom, or if he wants to defer to Robert, but could you address a little about the differences between three different wings programs, the basic, advanced, and master?
I'm gonna let Robert talk about that.
He's busy searching.
Actually, you ought to come up and get the microphone.
Just real quick, just to make it easy, basic is kind of, basic phase would be like a private pilot level. And everybody has to complete a basic phase of wings before they do advanced or master. The master would be more of the commercial instrument level, and then your, or the advanced, and then your master would be the ATP level. So it challenges you each way in the ACS standards as you narrow your scope of deviations regarding heading altitudes and different maneuvers. So that's just basic, high level, quick one, but it still has the same basic set of three knowledge phases, three knowledge topics and three flight activities for each one. You have to do the basic first before you can do the advanced. One of the things Tom mentioned, if you are an aircraft owner and you are participating in a safety program, the WINGS program will document all that. You can send it to your insurance agent, and you could potentially get a discount in the insurance if you are an aircraft owner. Not a guarantee, but again, you're participating in a safety program, so that's one benefit that might help you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so for those listening online, the basic is basically kind of the private pilot level, and then you complete that, you can go up to advanced is commercial pilot instrument, and then the master is more of an ATP level. So if you're looking at the airman certification standards, those are kind of the tolerances. They just get a little tighter as you move up there. And then as you complete those, you can often submit that to insurance companies for discounts. I think I get like a 5 or 10% discount for sending that in. So they say. I had something else I was gonna say, but it slipped my brain. So if it comes back, I'll say it. The flight instructor. So if you're doing the wings, and you take it to, say you've got a flight instructor that's not really involved with the wings program, it doesn't matter. They can still, when you complete the courses, you just print off some of the sheets like Tom had, take it to your instructor. It tells you exactly, the instructor exactly what you need to do.
There's the sign on.
Yeah, and so the instructor's like, oh, you need to do slow flight, you need to do a short field takeoff and a landing. And so you go out with your instructor and do that, and then they can either sign it here and you can submit it, or they can, oftentimes you just get their email and they just, yep, I did that with so-and-so. Or even better, hopefully they sign up for the wings, and then they can kind of have there's an instructor portal in there, so you can work directly with your students that way. But and then you can eventually get to, like Tom said, a CFI can be renewed just by doing these levels with other people in the wings program.
While we're talking about that, I just thought of this too, and it was in my presentation, and I kind of skimmed over it. If you take this checklist and do everything with an instructor that's not necessarily familiar with the WINGS program, he can sign the bottom of this sheet, and then that sheet can be taken to the FAA, to any other instructor that understands the WING program, and actually give you credit for it, even though he didn't fly. And we're going based on the signature of that instructor and his professionalism, saying this person did meet the criteria to pass this phase in flying. And so I can have somebody bring me a sheet with somebody's name on it that I don't specifically know, as long as I can determine that it is an instructor and everything looks in order. I can go ahead and give that gentleman credit or lady credit for that, even though I didn't fly it. And that is one of the questions that's asked on the instructor portal when you go through there and start giving credit. Did you give this guy lessons, or are you just signing this off for somebody else? So that is possible. Your flight instructor does not have to be WINGS associated, as long as you get it to the FAA or to somebody that understands how to work with the WINGS program. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
I've got one. Tell me a great story from a flight review and or an awful flight review. What makes one great? What makes one awful? Let's hear some more stories.
Well, I'm going to start on this one. I flew with a gentleman years ago that hadn't flown. that had, that hadn't flown for that hadn't flown very much in the past years. He had a nice airplane. Everything was current on the plane. Gentleman flown a lot in his past. We went out and flew 5 hours, and he was safe. When I got done with him, we had to do a lot of groundwork and we had to do a lot of flight work. But he did get back in the saddle and he was safe, and I would have put my family in. And when I was a designee for the FAA, that was kind of my criteria for a check ride. Would I put my wife and kids in with this person? And if the answer was no, they walked away to come back and do a little more practice before they went. But anyway, back to this. We flew, he was safe, and several years later, the gentleman calls me and he says, I'd like to take a flight review again with you. I enjoyed our last flight. And I said, okay, good. So I went ahead and just set a date and said, let's go. And I said, well, when's the last time you flew? And he opened his logbook up, and there's my name on the last line. So that kind of stood the hair up on my neck a little bit. But the point is you can be current in the book, but you may not be proficient even though you're current in the book. So that's my story. You guys got one? Or?
Yeah, I had a gentleman who's a truck driver, so he's got a CDL, he's a professional driver, so someone that had his private certificate from years ago, and he had flown every 2 years, one time with an instructor, and it was the same instructor, and he always signed him off because they were friends. Well, this instructor was no longer an instructor at this point, so he needed to find somebody else to do it, and why not me? So he comes in and starts telling me his background, and as I'm looking at his logbook, I realize, kind of like Tom's story, this is an individual who he's current but not proficient. So we go out and do our maneuvers, and nothing is within ACS standards, which is what we're going off of. The landings are completely unsafe and have to be taken over by my control to do go-arounds without him doing them on his own. So at this point, I have a conversation that this isn't going to be something that I sign you off, but we continue this as dual if you'd like. He didn't like that answer, so he wanted to end it. We ended the flight, and he was upset that it wasn't an hour ground and an hour flight, and instead proceeded to leave. Well, he was upset that it wasn't an hour flight, an hour ground, and then get signed off like his buddy had been doing for years. So he left. Months later, he had came back because one of his friends was in a little bit of an incident situation, and it scared him enough that he wanted to come do some flight training. So he became my student for about 6 months until he got signed off, and he's still doing well now. So.
I'll give this a try here, see if we can twist the wires in the right direction. How's that? All right, there we go. Yeah, in similar scenarios, the most common one that's, I don't really think it's a positive experience, but most people kind of say, well, we did the whole entire thing, but in 1 hour, all my other ones, and I usually tell people to plan for about 4 hours, because we're going to talk for about 20-30 minutes, and we're going to get a solid hour of ground in somehow between everybody's cell phones ringing, and then we're going to have to pre-fly a little bit. We need an hour to fly, and then some debrief. So that typically catches people off guard a little bit, and they get kind of sour taste from the get-go, but most of the time they enjoy the experience. This wasn't necessarily a flight review, but it was someone who had an incident, we'll say, VMC into IMC in a high-performance airplane and overestimated their skills, survived, and continued their flight after they got out of IMC and just telling ATC what they were going to do. And went to their basketball game, and instead of calling the phone number they got when they landed, and flew home the next day. So eventually the FAA calls this individual and says, hey, we need to talk. And long story short, he ends up in my office to do some training. So he didn't have to do another check ride, he just had to accomplish some additional training. And some of that was, I can't remember if it was wings courses, but I'm pretty sure it was. but it may have been some of the AOPA courses as well. Anyhow, we end up eventually getting to the airplane, and okay, well, we need all our documents, and there's no POH to be found anywhere. There's no weight and balance. Lots of interesting things, and so we ended up flying we did about 2 days of ground, about 5-6 hours total, and flew for about 2 hours. And it was interesting to me. It says, well, you're working on your instrument rating, and you have about 30 hours of simulated instrument here, but you haven't been working on it very long. And he's flying a Bonanza and a 182 off and on. Says, yeah, well, whenever I go somewhere, I just throw the foggles on. So, who's your safety pilot? Well, my wife's in the back, she's always with me. And I was like, wow, well, that's not the way that works, so please stop doing that. So, as far as I know, that was the last simulated instrument that he logged. But, as you know, the Bonanza has the club seating in the back, so I just envisioned his wife reading a book back there while he's cruising along with the foggles on. So, but to me, a positive outcome for a flight review is that somebody learns something, whether it's a different technique or I really like to dive into systems. I've flown so many different airplanes and seen a lot of things, but people have autopilots and GPSs and old RNAV units in their airplane, and they don't know how to use them. So you can make this autopilot follow your GPS in there. It does? Oh man! So if I can teach somebody something that's useful, as opposed to like, well, okay, the slow flight wasn't that great, but you can work on that. Here's something that might help you on your next cross country. The other individual, just since we're talking about him, would use his iPad only. Didn't set an altimeter. The GPS on the iPad is way more accurate than my altimeter. So we had lots of training to do. So he hasn't got his instrument rating yet, as far as I know. But that's all I've got. Any other questions? Like I said, if you guys have questions and want to come talk to us afterwards, I've got a couple of those checklists. You can. Tom's got some of those quick links things if you need some help navigating that. I'm sure we can help you if you're interested in that. John?
How can people reach you guys?
You can. John asked, how can you reach us? I'm more than happy to give out my contact information. I don't think I have any official cards, but I can give you my number. I should give you my wife's number because she's in charge, but we'll start with mine for tonight. So Josh works at Northwest Flight Service, so but I'm sure he'd give you his number too. And Tom's retired, so it's up to you. Yeah, feel free to talk to us afterwards here. Kind of have to hold it like that.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate you. Thank you for joining us online. Those of you who logged in, make sure to email WPA Spokane chapter at gmail.com to receive wings credit if you logged in tonight. Please find a board member. Maybe one more thing. Who here is a flight or a ground instructor? Can you guys raise your hands real quick if you're a flight or a ground instructor? Okay. I did have a couple questions earlier from people that were thinking about instruction. Maybe stick your hands up one more time, instructors. Sorry. And if you're needing to talk to an instructor, find one of those folks. Talk to one of our presenters. Trevor, Josh, Tom. Outstanding job. Thank you so much.
I would love to have